एकादशोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच मदनुग्रहाय परमम् गुह्यमध्यात्मसंज्ञितम् यत्त्वयोक्तम् वचस्तेन मोहोऽयम् विगतो मम भवाप्ययौ हि भूतानाम् श्रुतौ विस्तरशो मया त्वत्तः कमलपत्राक्ष माहात्म्यमपि चाव्ययम् एवमेतद्यथात्तत्त्वम् आत्मानम् परमेश्वर द्रष्टुमिच्छामि ते रूपम् ऐश्वरम् पुरुषोत्तम मन्यसे यदि तच्छक्यम् मया द्रष्टुमिति प्रभो योगेश्वर ततो मे त्वम् दर्शयात्मानमव्ययम्। श्रीभगवानुवाच पश्य मे पार्थरूपाणि शतशोऽथसहस्रशः नानाविधानि दिव्यानि नानावर्णाकृतीनि च पश्यादित्यान् वसून् रुद्रान् अश्विनौ मरुतस्तथा बहून्यदृष्टपूर्वाणि पश्याश्चर्याणि भारत इहैकस्थम् जगत्कृत्स्नम् पश्याद्य सचराचरम् मम देहे गुडाकेश यच्चान्यद्द्रष्टुमिच्छसि न तु माम् शक्यसे द्रष्टुम् अनेनैव स्वचक्षुषा दिव्यम् ददामि ते चक्षुः पश्य मे योगमैश्वरम्। सञ्जय उवाच एवमुक्त्वा ततो राजन् महायोगेश्वरो हरिः दर्शयामास पार्थाय परमम् रूपमैश्वरम् अनेकवक्त्रनयनम् अनेकाद्भुतदर्शनम् अनेकदिव्याभरणम् दिव्यानेकोद्यतायुधम् दिव्यमाल्याम्बरधरम् दिव्यगन्धानुलेपनम् सर्वाश्चर्यमयम् देवम् अनन्तम् विश्वतोमुखम् दिवि सूर्यसहस्रस्य भवेद्युगपदुत्थिता यदि भाससदृशी सा स्यात् भासस्तस्य महात्मनः तत्रैकस्थम् जगत्कृत्स्नम् प्रविभक्तमनेकधा अपश्यद्देवदेवस्य शरीरे पाण्डवस्तदा ततः स विस्मयाविष्टः हृष्टरोमा धनञ्जयः प्रणम्य शिरसा देवम् कृताञ्जलिरभाषत। अर्जुन उवाच पश्यामि देवांस्तव देवदेहे सर्वांस्तथा भूतविशेषसङ्घान् ब्रह्माणमीशम् कमलासनस्थम् ऋषींश्च सर्वानुरगांश्च दिव्यान् अनेकबाहूदरवक्त्रनेत्रम् पश्यामि त्वाम् सर्वतोऽनन्तरूपम् नान्तम् न मध्यम् न पुनस्तवादिम् पश्यामि विश्वेश्वर विश्वरूप किरीटिनम् गदिनम् चक्रिणम् च तेजोराशिम् सर्वतो दीप्तिमन्तम् पश्यामि त्वाम् दुर्निरीक्ष्यम् समन्तात् दीप्तानलार्कद्युतिमप्रमेयम् त्वमक्षरम् परमम् वेदितव्यम् त्वमस्य विश्वस्य परम् निधानम् त्वमव्ययः शाश्वतधर्मगोप्ता सनातनस्त्वम् पुरुषो मतो मे अनादिमध्यान्तमनन्तवीर्यम् अनन्तबाहुम् शशिसूर्यनेत्रम् पश्यामि त्वाम् दीप्तहुताशवक्त्रम् स्वतेजसा विश्वमिदम् तपन्तम् द्यावा पृथिव्योरिदमन्तरम् हि व्याप्तम् त्वयैकेन दिशश्च सर्वाः दृष्ट्वाद्भुतम् रूपमिदम् तवोग्रम् लोकत्रयम् प्रव्यथितम् महात्मन् अमीहित्वा सुरसङ्घा विशन्ति केचिद्भीताः प्राञ्चलयो गृह्णन्ति स्वस्तीत्युक्त्वा महर्षिः सिद्धसङ्घाः स्तुवन्ति त्वाम् स्तुतिभिः पुष्कलाभिः रुद्रादित्या वसवो ये च साद्याः विश्वेश्विनो मरुतश्चोष्मपाश्च गन्धर्वयक्षासुरसिद्धसङ्घाः वीक्षन्ते त्वाम् विस्मिताश्चैव सर्वे रूपम् महत्ते बहुवक्त्रनेत्रम् महाबाहो बहुबाहूरुपादम् बहूदरम् बहुदंश्राकराळम् दृष्ट्वा लोकाः प्रव्यथितास्तथाहम् नभस्पृशम् दीप्तमनेकवर्णम् व्यात्ताननम् दीप्तविशालनेत्रम् दृष्ट्वा हि त्वाम् प्रव्यथितान्तरात्मा धृतिम् न विन्दामि शमम् च विष्णो दंष्ट्राकराळानि च ते मुखानि दृष्ट्वैव कालानलसन्निभानि दिशो न जाने न लभे च शर्म प्रसीद देवेश जगन्निवास अमी च त्वाम् दार्तराष्ट्रस्य पुत्राः सर्वे सहैवामणिपालसङ्घैः भीष्मो द्रोणः सूतपुत्रस्तथासौ सहास्मदीनैरपि योधमुख्यैः वक्त्राणि ते स्वरमाना विशन्ति दंष्ट्राकराळाणि भयानकानि केचिद्विलग्ना दशनान्तरेषु सन्दृश्यन्ते चूर्णितैरुत्तमाङ्गैः यथा नदीनाम् बहवोऽम्बुवेगाः समुद्रमेवाभिमुखा द्रवन्ति तथा तवामी नरलोकवीराः विशन्ति वक्त्राण्यभिविज्वलन्ति यथा प्रदीप्तम् ज्वलनम् पतङ्गाः विशन्ति नाशाय समृद्धवेगाः तथैव नाशाय विशन्ति लोकाः तवापि वक्त्राणि समृद्धवेगाः लेलिह्यसेग्रसमानः समन्तात् लोकान् समग्रान् वदनैर्ज्वलद्भिः तेजोभिरापूर्य जगत्समग्रम् भासस्तवोग्राः प्रतपन्ति विष्णो आद्याधिमेको भवानुग्ररूपः नमोऽस्तु ते देववर प्रसीद विज्ञातुमिच्छामि भवन्तमाद्यम् न हि प्रजानामि तव प्रवृत्तिम् श्रीभगवानुवाच कालोऽस्मि लोकक्षयकृत्प्रवृद्धः लोकान् समाहर्तुमिह प्रवृत्तः ऋतेऽपि त्वाम् न भविष्यन्ति सर्वे एव स्थिता प्रत्यनीकेषु योधाः तस्मात् त्वमुत्तिष्ठ यशो लभस्व जित्वा शत्रून् भुङ्क्ष्व राज्यम् समृद्धम् मयैवैते निहताः पूर्वमेव निमित्तमात्रम् भव सव्यसाचिन् द्रोणम् च भीष्मम् च जयद्रथम् च कर्णम् तथान्यानपि योधवीरान् मया हतांस्त्वम् जहिमा व्यतिष्ठाः युध्यस्व चेतासि रणे सपत्नान् सञ्जय उवाच एतच्छ्रुत्वा वचनम् केशवस्य कृताञ्जलिर्वेपमानः किरीटी नमस्कृत्वा भूयजेवाह कृष्णम् स गद्गदम् भीतभीतः प्रणम्य अर्जुन उवाच स्थाने हृषीकेश तव प्रकीर्त्या जगत्प्रकृष्यत्यनुरज्यते च रक्षांसि भीतानि दिशो द्रवन्ति सर्वे नमस्यन्ति च सिद्धसङ्घाः कस्माच्च तेन न मेरन्महात्मन् गरीयसे ब्रह्मणोऽप्यादिकर्त्रे अनन्तदेवेश जगन्निवास त्वमक्षरम् सदसत्तत्परम् यत् त्वमादिदेवः पुरुषः पुराणः त्वमस्य विश्वस्य परम् निधानम् वेत्तासि वेद्यम् च परम् च धाम त्वया ततम् विश्वमनन्तरूप वायुर्यमोऽग्निर्वरुणः शशाङ्कः प्रजापतिस्त्वम् प्रपितामहश्च नमो नमस्तेऽस्तु सहस्रकृत्वः पुनश्च भूयोऽपि नमो नमस्ते नमः पुरस्तादथ पृष्ठतस्ते नमोऽस्तु ते सर्वत एव सर्व अनन्तवीर्यामितविक्रमस्त्वम् सर्वम् समाप्नोषि ततोऽसि सर्वः सखेति मत्वा प्रसभम् यदुक्तम् हे कृष्ण हे यादव हे सखेति अजानता महिमानम् तवेदम् मया प्रमादात् प्रणयेन वापि यच्चावहासार्थमसत्कृतोऽसि विहारशय्यासनभोजनेषु एकोऽथवाप्यच्युत तत्समक्षम् तत्क्षामये त्वामहमप्रमेयम् पितासि लोकस्य चराचरस्य त्वमस्य पूज्यस्य गुरुर्गरीयान् न त्वत्समोऽस्त्यभ्यधिकः कुतोऽन्यः लोकत्रयेऽप्यप्रतिमप्रभाव तस्मात् प्रणम्य प्रणिधाय कायम् प्रसादये त्वाम् अहमीशमीड्यम् विदेव पुत्रस्य सखेव सख्युः प्रियः प्रियायार्हसि देव सोढुम् अदृष्टपूर्वम् हृषितोऽस्मि दृष्ट्वा भयेन च प्रव्यथितम् मनो मे तदेव मे दर्शय देवरूपम् प्रसीद देवेश जगन्निवास किरीटिनम् गदिनम् चक्रहस्तम् इच्छामि त्वाम् द्रष्टुमहम् तथैव तेनैव रूपेण चतुर्भुजेन सहस्रबाहो भव विश्वमूर्ते श्रीभगवानुवाच मया प्रसन्नेन तवार्जुनेदम् रूपम् परम् दर्शितमात्मयोगात् तेजोमयम् विश्वमनन्तमाद्यम् यन्मे त्वदन्येन न दृष्टपूर्वम् न वेदयज्ञाध्ययनैर्न दानैः न च क्रियाभिर्न तपोभिरुग्रैः एवम् रूपः शक्य अहम् नृलोके द्रष्टुम् त्वदन्येन कुरु प्रवीर मा देव्यथा मा च विमूढभावः दृष्ट्वा रूपम् घोरमीदृन्ममेदम् व्यपेतभिः प्रीतमनाः पुनस्त्वम् तदेव मे रूपमिदम् प्रपश्य सञ्जय उवाच इत्यर्जुनम् वासुदेवस्तथोक्त्वा स्वकम् रूपम् दर्शयामास भूयः आश्वासयामास च भीतमेनं भूत्वा पुनः सौम्यवपुर्महात्मा अर्जुन उवाच दृष्ट्वेदं मानुषं रूपं तव सौम्यं जनार्दन इदानीमस्मि संवृत्तः सचेताः प्रकृतिं गतः श्रीभगवानुवाच सुदुर्दर्शमिदं रूपं दृष्टवानसि यन्मम देवा अप्यस्य रूपस्य नित्यं दर्शनकाङ्क्षिणः नाहं वेदैर्न तपसा न दानेन न चेज्जया शक्य एवं विधो द्रष्टुं दृष्टवानसि मां यथा भक्त्या त्वनन्यया शक्यः अहमेवं विधोऽर्जुन ज्ञातुं द्रष्टुं च तत्त्वेन प्रवेष्टुं च परन्तप मत्कर्म कृन्मत्परमः मद्भक्तः सङ्गवर्जितः निर्वैरः सर्वभूतेषु यः स मामेति पाण्डव ॐ तत्सत् इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे विश्वरूपदर्शनयोगो नाम 11ोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच मदनुग्रहाय परमं गुह्यमध्यात्मसंज्ञितं यत्त्वयोक्तं वचस्तेन मोहोऽयं विगतो मम भवाप्ययौ हि भूतानां श्रुतौ विस्तरशो मया त्वत्तः कमलपत्राक्ष माहात्म्यमपि चाव्ययम् एवमेतद्यथात्तत्त्वम् आत्मानं परमेश्वर द्रष्टुमिच्छामि ते रूपम् ऐश्वरं पुरुषोत्तम मन्यसे यदि तच्छक्यं मया द्रष्टुमिति प्रभो योगेश्वर ततो मे त्वं दर्शयात्मानमव्ययम्। श्रीभगवानुवाच पश्य मे पार्थरूपाणि
पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौः शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौः शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः। May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, Sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas satbuddhimapnotu sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmaheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin today looking at some of the insights we find in chapter 11. In the earlier sections, we have seen how towards the end of chapter 9, Krishna exhorts Arjuna how important it is for a spiritual seeker to remain absorbed in the divine, that whatever activities are done, whatever thinking is done, everything should be directed toward the spiritual ideal. Whatever Krishna has spoken about the divine up to this point has been fairly abstract. It's in the realm of ideas. When we began in chapter 2, we saw it was very highly philosophical, the description about the Atman and so on. And then the entire activities occurring at the cosmic level, described as a yajna, as a cosmic sacrifice. And then Krishna could see that Arjuna is still trying to grapple with this new vision of reality, of existence that is being presented before him. And so in chapter 10, which we saw last week, Krishna provided Arjuna with how the divine can manifest in this world. That the divine, the transcendent reality is not simply completely intangible, completely are grasped to such an extent that we have no contact with it, but that there is a way to get in touch, to commune with this higher reality. And one way of doing that was to recognize the presence of the divine in everything and everyone around us, seeing God everywhere and in everyone, seeing the manifestation of the divine everywhere and in everyone. And how that is done, where the divine can be found externally, we saw in the chapter 10, the manifestation of the divine being called the vibhutis. Now, it looks like Arjuna is satisfied, but also wants something more. So you see the very first verse in chapter 11 begins this way. Arjuna uvacha madanugrahaya paramam guhyam adhyatma saudnitam yatvayoktam vachastena moho yam vigato mama. Arjuna said, "But the supremely profound words on the discrimination of the self that have been spoken by thee out of compassion towards me, this my delusion is gone. Moho yam vigato mama." This moha, this delusion of mine has disappeared. Now these words have not to be taken too literally, in the sense that, well, if the delusion is gone, then Arjuna is already enlightened, then it's become pointless to have the rest of the Gita. So there is certainly some layers over us which prevent us from seeing the reality. Some of those layers have been removed. And we see that happening to us as well in spiritual seekers, that we attain greater clarity in life as we pursue our spiritual practices, as we go through the different experiences in our life, try to understand them, try to learn from them, and improve ourselves day after day after day. And so that measure of greater clarity that we acquire, it just seems as if the thick veil that was separating me from God, that veil is not as thick any longer. So it is in that sense we have to understand the words of Arjuna when he says, my delusion is gone. It means that Arjuna feels deep inside that I'm beginning to see some light now. It's not still the end of the tunnel, but I'm able to see the light at some distance. It's in that sense that delusion is gone. And then he continues in the second and third verses. Of thee, O lotus-eyed, I have heard at length of the origin and dissolution of beings, as also thy inexhaustible greatness. So it is, O Supreme Lord, as thou hast declared thyself, still I desire to see thy Ishvara form, O Supreme Purusha. So Arjuna has heard about all these things in pretty abstract way, that the divine being the origin and dissolution of beings. Now, what Arjuna is looking for is something a little bit more tangible. And this reflects the struggle that all of us have in our spiritual lives. Oftentimes when we are entering into a serious practice of spiritual life, when we begin our spiritual journey, oftentimes we are given books to read about the lives of the saints and mystics, and basic texts like the Gita, the Upanishad, and so on. And those books help us get some idea. Those books may help us solve some of our questions, resolve some of our doubts. And as that begins to happen, every question that is answered, every doubt that is solved, feels like a breakthrough. And we can look back at our own lives. Some of the time, the first time we heard about, or there is the presence of this infinite Atman within me, the great self, that a part of me, some part of me, which I may not have experienced yet, about which I probably don't know much, but there is something within me that is birthless and deathless, that the body will perish, but that something will not perish. If we remember the first time ever that this thought came to us, either through reading or through discussion, on whichever way, and it made us think, it made us excited, it made us wonder about the things we don't know about inner life. It just feels like a breakthrough. Now, if we don't lead a very mindful life, if our lives are superficial, or if we just don't reflect over whatever is happening in our life, then we may miss all these breakthroughs. It is sometimes said that God is continually revealing her splendor before us. But because we haven't become sensitive yet, we are not able to see the presence of God. A paradox that we have referred to several times before, that in one breath we say that God is everywhere, God is omnipresent, and the very next breath then we lament, when will I see God? Now that's something ironical about it, about having the strong faith that God is everywhere, and our present experience of saying, and not being able to see God anywhere. So how come someone who is everywhere is found nowhere? And that was the idea that Krishna emphasized in chapter 10 and in earlier chapters as well, that I am manifest in every little thing in this world. And if I cannot see God in all of those things, let me begin by seeing God in something. And many of us might find that while it is difficult to feel the presence of God everywhere, there may be certain places, we go to a temple or a church or a synagogue or a mosque, some place of worship. It may not be like every temple or every church or every mosque, but maybe sometimes one may feel a sense of connection in some particular temple or some particular place of worship. And that's good. And one of the reasons people go to some of these places of pilgrimage is because there are certain spots, certain places of worship where people are able to feel the presence of the divine more tangibly than in other places. Now, if I can find such a presence in one place or in one person or in one ideal, that gives me hope that the truth that is everywhere, I'm able to feel it, however vaguely, at least in one place, in one ideal, in one form. And if I can see that in one place, the hope is eventually I might be able to see it in more than one places. So that is what the dilemma here for Arjuna is, that he is getting a glimpse of that higher reality, which is how he feels that his delusion, his moha is disappearing, and yet he wants something more tangible because ideas still are very abstract. Not everyone can live in the world of ideas. It's like a description of a delicious, nice, hot coffee is wonderful, but it's a description. It's still ideas. And it cannot come anywhere close to actually having a hot cup of coffee in your hand, and then you're sipping it and you're just feeling its taste and its aroma on the tip of your tongue. That cannot, no idea, no concept, no description can come anywhere close to it. So that is where Arjuna's mind is inching toward. So he says, I've heard these ideas, I've heard these concepts, but I just want to actually see you in your Ishvara form. And then he says in verse 4, Manyase yaditat shakyam maya drashtumiti prabho yogeshvara tato me tvam darshayatmanam avyayam. If, O Lord, thou thinkest of me capable of seeing it, then show thy immutable self. So he says, if you think I am fit enough to see that, then please show that to me. And then the Krishna replies to him. Look especially verse number 8. Let me read the verse. Natumam shakyase drashtum anenaiva swachakshusha divyam dadami te chakshuhu pashyame yogamaishwaram. But thou cannot see me with these eyes of thine. I give thee supersensuous sight. Behold my supreme yoga power. This idea also comes to us in many different ways through the teachings of many different traditions as well, that it is possible to have a glimpse of the divine. But if it were possible to see the divine in just this set of eyes, then everyone would have seen the divine. But we know that having a direct experience, direct perception of the divine is still a very rare phenomenon. Only a few people are able to do it. And so clearly there is something special that happens, some special ability, some special instruments are developed by which they are able to see the divine who is everywhere anyway. But how come only some people see the divine and others don't? And that is what Krishna is referring to here. That you, Krishna says, he tells Arjuna, you cannot see that Ishvara form, that divine form, that divine vision through these ordinary eyes. Divyam dadamite chakshuhu. I'll give you a divine set of eyes. Sri Ramakrishna refers to this in his conversations as well. Those of you who have been reading that big book called The Gospel of Ramakrishna would have come across this conversation where Sri Ramakrishna says that as we advance in spiritual life, we acquire a set of mystical senses. So these are the eyes, the physical eyes. But we need mystical eyes to be able to see the divine vision. We need a mystical sense of hearing in order to hear divine music. So there have been, for instance, devotees of Krishna who have heard Krishna playing that melodious tune on his flute. They believe that Krishna's playing on the flute is going on continually, non-stop. And yet, we are not able to hear it now. But if I can develop that mystical sense of hearing, then I'll be able to hear Krishna's tune, or I'll be able to hear other divine sounds. Similarly, a mystical sense of a smell, which then you get these divine fragrances all around. A lot of yogis have described all these experiences. And these experiences came because it's a whole set of mystical senses, sense organs that they develop. And that is what Krishna is saying here, that I will give you this divine eyes through which you will be able to see me. And then Sanjaya, the narrator of the Gita, then describes in 3 or 4 verses that after Krishna gives that sight to Arjuna, what is it that Arjuna sees? So Sanjaya's description of that divine form that Krishna makes it possible for Arjuna to see is wonderful, is fairly benign in many ways. Look at verses 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. Let me read a little bit of them. He says, with numerous mouths and eyes, with numerous wondrous sights, with numerous celestial ornaments, with numerous celestial weapons uplifted, wearing celestial garlands and apparel, anointed with celestial scented as fragrances, the all-wonderful, resplendent, boundless, and all-formed. If the splendor of 1,000 suns were to rise up simultaneously in the sky, that would be like the splendor of that mighty being. In the body of the God of gods, the son of Pandu, that is Arjuna, then saw the whole universe resting in one with the manifold divisions. So, as soon as Krishna bestowed this divine eyes to Arjuna, he saw this cosmic form of the Lord, as the description that we just read. And then, beginning verse 15, we get to hear what Arjuna saw in his own words. So up to this point, it was Sanjaya describing what Arjuna saw. And then now Arjuna himself is describing what he saw. And you can see a slight change in tone. While Sanjaya's description was fairly neutral in many ways, what Arjuna sees has a little bit more edge to it. See verses 16 onwards. I see thee of boundless form on every side with manifold arms, stomachs, mouths, and eyes. Neither the end nor the middle, nor also the beginning of thee do I see, O Lord of the universe, O universal form. And then it describes this cosmic form with all the divine ornaments and so on. Still, the description tends to be, it's like this. Even when we are seeing something more tangible, but the moment we put it into words, whoever later on reads those words, for that person it is still going to be a bit abstract. It's a little bit like, again, let's go back to coffee. So if I now have this delicious blend of coffee right in my hand, and I'm just sipping it, I'm really relishing it, really enjoying it, and then someone asks me, describe the coffee that you're drinking, and then I will say, oh, this is so delicious, this is so good, and depending on my language skills, I will give a description of the kind of taste I'm having. Now, someone else reads that description. While for me, the experience of drinking the coffee was very real, and the words I use to describe it are the best I can do to describe my experience. Someone else who has not actually tasted the coffee, but just reading the description, to that person it's still going to be fairly abstract. And so we have to keep that in mind, that some of the things that Arjuna says here may sound still a little bit abstract to us, but for Arjuna, it was something real, tangible that Arjuna was seeing and experiencing. But right now, we have access only to the description, not exactly to that experience of Arjuna. So this is what Arjuna says. Thou art the imperishable, the supreme being, the one thing to be known. Thou art the great refuge of this universe. Thou art the undying guardian of the eternal dharma. Thou art the ancient Purusha. I see thee without beginning, middle, or end, infinite in power, of manifold form, arms, the sun and the moon, thine eyes, the burning fire, thy mouth. Here it's when that whole vision starts getting a little bit fierce. It begins by saying you have the imperishable supreme being, and we say, oh, that's the kind of a vision I would like to have. But then look at what he's describing now. I see thee without beginning, middle, or end, infinite in power, of manifold arms, the sun and the moon thy eyes, the burning fire thy mouth, heating the whole universe with thy radiance. The space between heaven and earth and all the quarters are filled with thee alone. Having seen this, thy marvelous and awful form, awful, the three worlds are trembling with fear, O great souled one. Now, this was not something many people might expect. You are having this great infinite vision of the Lord, of the divine, and all of us would want that vision, but the effect of that vision is the whole worlds are trembling with fear. Continue, verse number 21. Verily, into thee enter this host of devas, and extol thee in fear with joined palm may it well, thus saying, bands of great rishis and siddhas praise thee with splendid hymns. And then we have the description about all these divine figures from the different celestial worlds praising him. And then look at verse number 23. Having seen thy immeasurable form, with many mouths and eyes, with many arms, thighs, and feet, with many stomachs, and fearful with many tusks, the worlds are terrified, and so am I. Now, the joy of seeing this presence of the divine, you see there is a fear. The world is terrified. Arjuna is terrified also. Verse 24, on seeing thee touching the sky, shining in many a color, with mouths wide open, with large fiery eyes. I am terrified at heart and find no courage nor peace. Not the kind of vision we think of when we say, I want to see the Lord. We think our heart will be filled with peace. It's a very different vision here. Arjuna is terrified. There is no peace. And it gets even more terrifying. Look at verse 25. Having seen thy mouths fearful with tusks, blazing like pralaya fires, I know not the four quarters, nor do I find peace. Have mercy, O Lord of the Devas, O abode of the universe. And then, in the next verses, we'll see Arjuna sees that all his opponents, the people he is fighting in the war, the very people he did not want to fight with in the beginning, the very people he was afraid that he will have to kill in order to win this war, all of those people by name are mentioned here. One by one, all those people are entering into this wide, terrifying mouth of this cosmic being, this divine being that he's seeing before him. Look at verse 28. Verily, as the many torrents of rivers flow towards the ocean, so do thou these heroes of the world enter thy fiercely flaming mouths. So, in this fierce mouth, all of these Kaurava warriors, the opposing army soldiers and their commanders, they are all entering into this. And in this way, the description goes on. And then Arjuna is a little confused. It's like, what is the purpose I'm seeing all this? And then Krishna speaks. And I think this is the key. Verse number 32 is a key. It's a very important verse. So I'm going to read the Sanskrit as well. This is verse 32. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kalosmi Loka Kshayakrit Pravruddho Lokan Samahartu Miha Pravruttaha Ritepi Tvam Na Bhavishyanti Sarve Yeva Sthita Pratyanikeshu Yodhaha. The Blessed Lord said, I am the mighty world-destroying time, here made manifest for the purpose of enfolding the universe. Even without thee, none of the warriors arrayed in the hostile armies shall live. So let's pause here a little bit. So when Krishna showed this form to Arjuna, and we have just read Arjuna's description of what he saw, what are the thoughts that come to our mind as we read this description? One thought that comes right to the mind is, if this is what the cosmic form of the divine is, I'm not in any great hurry to see it right now. There's enough of worries and fear in my life now. There is enough of things that terrify me now that I don't need to have this additional cosmic terror right in front of me. So it's a kind of a mixed thing. There is the joy of seeing the divine, but also the terror. It's not a very benign form of the divine. And then the question would be, is this what divine is? And the answer is no. This is not all that is it. Well, let me put it this way. What Arjuna saw was not a complete picture of the divine. What Arjuna saw was what Arjuna needed to see at that time. And so this is a general principle all of us as spiritual seekers can keep in our mind, that as far as divine revelation is concerned, divine forms are concerned, divine visions are concerned, we will get to see only what is right for us, what is good for us at that time. There is no limit to the ways in which the divine can manifest. The divine, there is really no limit. There is no fixed blueprint that as I advance in spiritual life, this is what I'll see first, this is what I'll see second, that is what I'll see third. No one can draw that roadmap, because spiritual life has infinite possibilities. No two lives are going to be identical. So no two spiritual seekers are going to see exactly or experience exactly the same things in exactly the same order. What we do know from the teachings of all those great ones who have gone before us is that whenever we are ready for a certain experience, whenever a certain experience is needed for our spiritual evolution, that will come to us. It may not be, and usually isn't, an all-comprehensive experience of the divine. It could be just one segment, one part, one aspect of it. But that is the aspect that is needed for me at that point in my life. So what Arjuna saw was what Arjuna needed to see at that time. Sometimes the divine, as the divine manifests, as God manifests in life, is sometimes seen as a threefold way in which God manifests. One is the creative aspect of God. In Sanskrit, it's called the Srishti. That aspect of the divine that preserves and maintains this universe, that is called Sthiti in Sanskrit. And that aspect of the divine that destroys the universe. A better way, it's destroys, but it's not in the sense of total absolute destruction. It's more in the sense of absorption. That is, creation is not seen in Vedanta, through the Gita and the Upanishads, as a one-time event. Creation, although I'm using the word that has a loaded theological history behind it, a better way to probably express the idea of Srishti, a better word might be projection, but creation is something the word that gets often used in religious conversation, so we can use it, but recognize that when we use the word creation in the Gita context, it simply means that which is undifferentiated becoming differentiated, that which is subtle becoming gross, that which is intangible becoming tangible, that which is unmanifest becoming manifest. So a process of creation in the Gita really means a manifestation of something that remained in a seed form. So that is the creation. Now, once this universe becomes tangible, becomes graspable by the senses, we see that this creation is sustained for a while. It doesn't disappear immediately. So that power of the divine, that aspect of the divine that sustains it, that preserves it, that maintains it, and that is called the sthiti. And then there is the third aspect of the divine, which destroys or removes that tangibility and absorbs the universe back into that undifferentiated or a subtle form. So coming into being really means manifesting from the subtle to the gross, remaining for a while in this realm of time, and then going back to that seed form. And sometimes these three functions or these three aspects of the divine get personalized, or there is the power of creation, the power of preservation, the power of absorption. All of these powers get personified into the deity known as Brahma, who is associated with creation, Vishnu, who is associated with preserving the universe, and Shiva, who is associated with absorbing the universe back into its source. So when we speak about a cosmic vision of the divine, we can ask whether that vision of the divine, was it a vision that was associated with the creative aspect of the divine, or that aspect of the divine that preserves the universe, or that aspect of the divine which absorbs the universe back into the source, or destroys the universe as we understand it. And clearly, the vision that Arjuna sees here in the 11th chapter of the Gita stands for only one of these three aspects. And that's pretty obvious which that aspect is. Yes, it is that destructive aspect of the divine. Now, do we have examples of what kind of visions or what kind of experiences are associated with these other two aspects? And we do. So, many of you will be familiar with this hymn called the Purusha Sukta in the Vedas. Now, the Purusha Sukta, there's another one Sukta called the Nasadiya Sukta. And these are predominantly associated with the creative aspect of the divine. The descriptions there, all of the descriptions that we find in the Vedas are descriptions of experiences. That is why the Vedic rishis are called the mantra drashtas, who saw these things. So, one of the reasons the Vedas are considered apaurushaya, that is, they don't have any human authorship. One of the reasons the Vedas are considered a revealed text, one of the reasons the authority of the Vedas remains unquestioned, is because no parts of the Vedas were thought out intellectually. They are not the product of intellectual activity. The entire Vedas are a result of mystical experience. So it is these experiences narrated by the sages in ancient times. That's why the original wisdom of the Vedas was transmitted orally. They didn't immediately go and sit and write books about it. So these are the things they saw, these are the things they experienced, and then they passed it on to their disciples. And then the disciples questioned about it and meditated on it, and then more experiences came. So it's a compilation of the experiences of these enlightened ones. And because it is a compilation, and experiences don't come necessarily in a very chronological order, the divine will reveal in any which way, at any which time, any time. And therefore, when we study the Upanishads, and especially if you go to the oldest among these Upanishads, we'll see that it's not very easy to follow the train of thought always, because it seems as random experiences, and they have been put together in some way, but it just seems more like in some deep forests in the Himalayas, the sage is just narrating, this is what I saw, this is what I saw. And then the students are then meditating on it. And then they are meditating, they're having their experiences, passing it on to their students. So that's how these wisdom was passed on from one generation to the next. And at some point in history, much later, centuries later, then they started putting it down in writing. And so the experiences that are described in the Purusha Sukta and Nasadiya Sukta are the experience of the visions that these sages had of the creative aspect of the divine. Some of the descriptions we find earlier in the Gita itself, for instance, in the 4th chapter, when Krishna speaks about the cosmic yajna, the cosmic sacrifice, the whole conceptual framework built around yajna is a outcome, is a product of a description of the experiences involved in the sustaining aspect of the divine that protects and preserves and nourishes the universe. And that happens through this yajna, the cosmic sacrifice. And this experience that we are seeing now in the chapter 11 is about this destructive aspect of the divine. And therefore it is so terrifying. So we are not surprised at all that Arjuna was terrified, because we will be terrified too. And it's possible that the extent of our getting terrified might be a lot more than Arjuna's. All said and done, Arjuna was, as a soldier, was a brave, courageous person, and obviously fit for this experience, which is why Krishna gave him those divine eyes and made him experience that. And so we don't know. And we just hope and pray that whenever we have any of these spiritual visions, that we are fit to hold that experience and understand it, and not just say, oh, I had something and I had no idea what happened to me. Doesn't help. And that is why I said this verse number 32 is a key, because Krishna begins by saying, Kalosmi loka kshayakrit pravrittaha. He says, I am the mighty world-destroying time. So time as a devourer, as a time that eats away everything. And that's the analogy we find in the Gita and in many other texts as well. That if you personify time, and then we see that time just swallows everything. Look about many of the people we may have met in our lives, maybe in our own families, maybe our great-grandfather, grandfather. So people of the earlier generation, so time kind of swallows them and they disappear. Things disappear. We see. If you have visited a city or a town after 40 years, 50 years, many of the landmarks that existed during your childhood maybe, and you go there after a long time, you find they are gone. I don't have to go very far. There was this beautiful building, a very old building we had just at the edge on the Kenmore Square here, at the end of Deerfield Street, and Comm Ave and Beacon Street. And so now a new building is coming there. And after a few years, this is all the building that people are going to see. And maybe some old-timers will say, oh, before this building came, there was something else here. Well, right across the Bay State Road where the center is, many of you who have been coming to the center for a long time know we had a big parking lot. But now we know, since the last few years, the parking lot, more than half of that parking lot is gone. Now we have a big building there. So things are changing. Time comes and changes the landscape. And so that is the destructive aspect, that continuous change that is occurring, that those who are living pass into the realm of the dead, and then new life comes in. So this constant change, one of the words that gets used in Sanskrit is samsara. And samsara really means samyak sarati, that which is constantly changing. And change does involve destruction of the old while coming in the birth of the new. So this is one thing we have to keep in mind as we reflect on this cosmic vision that Arjuna had. And I'll just conclude with one thought. We can speculate, or why is it that Arjuna was given this vision and not some other vision? And clearly, only Krishna knows an answer to that. But that cannot and will not and should not stop us from speculating about it. And we look at, as I said, verses 26 and 27 of the 11th chapter, where specific names are mentioned. So there was this, what Krishna is saying is that to Arjuna, that even if there is the least bit of doubt in your mind about what the outcome will be of this battle, the battle is about to start, the conches have already been blown, the fighting has not yet begun, but if you're still having doubts about what will happen, know it for certain that these very people whom you are afraid of or hesitating to kill, they are already going to die. Because this is the divine vision. They are all entering into this fierce mouth of the time, the devourer, time that swallows everything. Bhishma, Drona, all of them are entering. They are all going to go. Not because of you, in spite of you. So what Krishna is telling Arjuna is, you are not the cause of their death. You are only an instrument. They are going to die. Even if you choose not to fight, they are going to die anyway. But I want you to be the instrument. Do the duty that has come to you. Now that's not what he's saying here, but that's the message that Krishna may be sending through this vision. So at this moment in Arjuna's life, he needed that destructive aspect for his. So don't be afraid to want a divine vision, because we will only see what God wants us to see, what is right for us at that moment. So don't imagine that next time you have a vision, you will have this one infinite being and everyone entering into that. Well, you may, but there are many other visions possible also. So we will stop here right now, and if you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, please share them, and we will meet in 5 minutes and take a look at it. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu.
अर्जुन उवाच मदनुग्रहाय परमम् गुह्यमध्यात्मसंज्ञितम् यत्त्वयोक्तम् वचस्तेन मोहोऽयम् विगतो मम भवाप्ययौ हि भूतानाम् श्रुतौ विस्तरशो मया त्वत्तः कमलपत्राक्ष माहात्म्यमपि चाव्ययम् एवमेतद्यथात् तत्त्वम् आत्मानम् परमेश्वर द्रष्टुमिच्छामि ते रूपम् ऐश्वरम् पुरुषोत्तम मन्यसे यदि तच्छक्यम् मया द्रष्टुमिति प्रभो योगेश्वर ततो मे त्वम् दर्शयात्मानमव्ययम्। श्रीभगवानुवाच पश्य मे पार्थरूपाणि शतशोऽथसहस्रशः नानाविधानि दिव्यानि नानावर्णाकृतीनि च पश्यादित्यान् वसून् रुद्रान् अश्विनौ मरुतस्तथा बहून्यदृष्टपूर्वाणि पश्याश्चर्याणि भारत इहैकस्थम् जगत्कृत्स्नम् पश्याद्य सचराचरम् मम देहे गुडाकेश यच्चान्यद्द्रष्टुमिच्छसि न तु माम् शक्यसे द्रष्टुम् अनेनैव स्वचक्षुषा दिव्यम् ददामि ते चक्षुः पश्य मे योगमैश्वरम् सञ्जय उवाच एवमुक्त्वा ततो राजन् महायोगेश्वरो हरिः दर्शयामास पार्थाय परमम् रूपमैश्वरम् अनेकवक्त्रनयनम् अनेकाद्भुतदर्शनम् अनेकदिव्याभरणम् दिव्यानेकोद्यतायुधम् दिव्यमाल्याम्बरधरम् दिव्यगन्धानुलेपनम् सर्वाश्चर्यमयम् देवम् अनन्तम् विश्वतोमुखम् दिवि सूर्यसहस्रस्य भवेद्युगपदुत्थिता यदि भासदृशी सा स्यात् भासस्तस्य महात्मनः तत्रैकस्थम् जगत्कृत्स्नम् प्रविभक्तमनेकधा अपश्यद्देवदेवस्य शरीरे पाण्डवस्तदा ततः स विस्मयाविष्टः हृष्टरोमा धनञ्जयः प्रणम्य शिरसा देवम् कृताञ्जलिरभाषत अर्जुन उवाच पश्यामि देवांस्तव देवदेहे सर्वांस्तथा भूतविशेषसङ्घान् ब्रह्माणमीशम् कमलासनस्थम् ऋषींश्च सर्वानुरगांश्च दिव्यान् अनेकबाहूदरवक्त्रनेत्रम् पश्यामि त्वाम् सर्वतोऽनन्तरूपम् नान्तम् न मध्यम् न पुनस्तवादिम् पश्यामि विश्वेश्वर विश्वरूप किरीटिनम् गदिनम् चक्रिणम् च तेजोराशिम् सर्वतो दीप्तिमन्तम् पश्यामि त्वाम् दुर्निरीक्ष्यम् समन्तात् दीप्तानलार्कद्युतिमप्रमेयम् त्वमक्षरम् परमम् वेदितव्यम् त्वमस्य विश्वस्य परम् निधानम् त्वमव्ययः शाश्वतधर्मगोप्ता सनातनस्त्वम् पुरुषो मतो मे अनादिमध्यान्तमनन्तवीर्यम् अनन्तबाहुम् शशिसूर्यनेत्रम् पश्यामि त्वाम् दीप्तहुताशवक्त्रम् स्वतेजसा विश्वमिदम् तपन्तम् द्यावा पृथिव्योरिदमन्तरम् हि व्याप्तम् त्वयैकेन दिशश्च सर्वाः दृष्ट्वाद्भुतम् रूपमिदम् तवोग्रम् लोकत्रयम् प्रव्यथितम् महात्मन् अमीहि त्वासुरसङ्घा विशन्ति केचिद्भीताः प्राञ्चलयो गृह्णन्ति स्वस्तीत्युक्त्वा महर्षिः सिद्धसङ्घाः स्तुवन्ति त्वाम् स्तुतिभिः पुष्कलाभिः रुद्रादित्या वसवो ये च साद्याः विश्वेश्विनो मरुतश्चोष्मपाश्च गन्धर्वयक्षासुरसिद्धसङ्घाः वीक्षन्ते त्वाम् विस्मिताश्चैव सर्वे रूपम् महत्ते बहुवक्त्रनेत्रम् महाबाहो बहुबाहूरुपादम् बहूदरम् बहुदंश्राकराळम् दृष्ट्वा लोकाः प्रव्यथितास्तथाहम् नभस्पृशम् दीप्तमनेकवर्णम् व्यात्ताननम् दीप्तविशालनेत्रम् दृष्ट्वा हि त्वाम् प्रव्यथितान्तरात्मा धृतिम् न विन्दामि शमम् च विष्णो दंष्ट्राकराळानि च ते मुखानि दृष्ट्वैव कालानलसन्निभानि दिशो न जाने न लभे च शर्म प्रसीद देवेश जगन्निवास अमी च त्वाम् दार्तराष्ट्रस्य पुत्राः सर्वे सहैवामणिपालसङ्घैः भीष्मो द्रोणः सूतपुत्रस्तथासौ सहास्मदीनैरपि योधमुख्यैः वक्त्राणि ते स्मरमाणा विशन्ति दंष्ट्राकराळाणि भयानकानि केचिद्विलग्ना दशनान्तरेषु सन्दृश्यन्ते चूर्णितैरुत्तमाङ्गैः यथा नदीनाम् बहवोऽम्बुवेगाः समुद्रमेवाभिमुखाद्रवन्ति तथा तवामी नरलोकवीराः विशन्ति वक्त्राण्यभिविज्वलन्ति यथा प्रदीप्तम् ज्वलनम् पतङ्गाः विशन्ति नाशाय समृद्धवेगाः तथैव नाशाय विशन्ति लोकाः तवापि वक्त्राणि समृद्धवेगाः लेलिह्यसे ग्रसमानः समन्तात् लोकान् समग्रान् वदनैर्ज्वलद्भिः तेजोभिरापूर्य जगत्समग्रम् भासस्तवोग्राः प्रतपन्ति विष्णो आख्यातिमेको भवानुग्ररूपः नमोऽस्तु ते देव वरप्रसीद विज्ञातुमिच्छामि भवन्तमाद्यम् न हि प्रजानामि तव प्रवृत्तिम् श्रीभगवानुवाच कालोऽस्मि योऽस्मि लोकक्षयकृत्प्रवृद्धः लोकान् समाहर्तुमिह प्रवृत्तः ऋतेऽपि त्वाम् न भविष्यन्ति सर्वे एव स्थिता प्रत्यनीकेषु योधाः तस्मात् त्वमुत्तिष्ठ यशो लभस्व जित्वा शत्रून् भुङ्क्ष्व राज्यम् समृद्धम् मयैवैते निहताः पूर्वमेव निमित्तमात्रम् भव सव्यसाचिन् द्रोणम् च भीष्मम् च जयद्रथम् च कर्णम् तथान्यानपि योधवीरान् मया हतांस्त्वम् जहिमा व्यतिष्ठाः युध्यस्व चेतासि रणे सपत्नान् सञ्जय उवाच एतच्छ्रुत्वा वचनम् केशवस्य कृताञ्जलिर्वेपमानः किरीटी नमस्कृत्वा भूयजेवाह कृष्णम् स गद्गदम् भीतभीतः प्रणम्य अर्जुन उवाच स्थाने ऋषिकेश तव प्रकीर्त्या.
First, if Lord Krishna is so powerful, what purpose does Arjuna fighting signify? The Lord could very well kill all the enemies in a flash. Yes. But why would Lord do that? I mean, I think it's good to kind of get an idea about what exactly do we mean here. Kauravas are not Krishna's enemies. Krishna is not taking any sides in this battle. God does not have any enemies. Does God have friends? I mean, if we see God as a divine father or a divine mother, and just like a mother or father, all children are equal. In fact, one of the qualities that Krishna emphasizes again and again through the Gita is samadarshitva, looking upon all equally. And therefore, I don't think that in the eyes of God, Kauravas are not enemies. What God will do is support those who are trying to help those who are fighting to do what is good and try to destroy evil. I mean, that's essentially why the avatar comes. But in general, God does not directly intervene as described in the Gita. I mean, there are descriptions in other traditions where God directly might send plague and earthquake, and you see these kind of act. And sometimes people do see it as a divine punishment and things like that. It's again a question of interpretation. When some big natural calamity occurs, is it God sending it or what? And so in this case also, why Krishna didn't do it, whether Krishna should do it, only Krishna knows. Again, there is no definitive answer to this. I mean, I can think about the possible answers in many different ways, but this is one way I thought that there are also ideas in books which say that trials and tribulations that come to us in life, or challenges that come to us in our life, are sent so that we can become stronger by facing them. We can learn, we can grow, we can evolve. So one way to see this is that all these challenges that come, maybe this was a way for Arjuna to grow and learn and improve. Yeah. Next. How is this infinite supreme being hidden as this finite, limited, sorrowful being? What kind of game is this? Can we gain firm strength, faith and grace one day to end this delusion? Yes. How is this infinite being hidden as the finite, limited, sorrowful being? Well, that is what we are seeing right now, that this one infinite being somehow has gotten divided. The blissfulness of that infinite now seems to have disappeared, and then there is sorrow and suffering everywhere. What kind of game is this? It's a strange game. According to the Gita thinking and the thinking in the Upanishads, that this is more a result of my misperception than anything else. That the Supreme Being is always supreme, is always filled in bliss, is always one. But somehow something has gone wrong here and I'm seeing things differently. And therefore, the change is not in God, the change is in me. And that change is a kind of sleep. We know that when we go to sleep and we start dreaming, and the dream world that I see, nothing has really changed really, but I am in the dream world because of my sleep. When I wake up, I am back into reality. So that's essentially how this is the kind of game that is being spoken of here. Next. Descent of Brahman and manifestation in tangible form, is that the same as the ascent transformation of a human being into an enlightened being? You could say so. Certainly, those on the non-dualistic path, those who see themselves as in tune with the Advaitic way of thinking, can understand that the two are exactly the same. Next, each of us has unique life experiences. All of us go through creative, sustaining, and destructive experiences. Are these life experiences a way in which God reveals herself to us? Possible. In fact, through every experience, something of the divine is being revealed to us. That is why Swami Vivekananda says in his Karma Yoga lectures that to a Karma Yogi, every moment must become an awakening. Every moment there is a chance to learn, to grow. So if we want to learn, life will teach us in many different ways. Next, we see that Sanjaya became a realized soul since he was seeing the same vision as Arjuna. But Dhritarashtra was listening to his description and did not get the same effect. Is that right? I'm not really seeing in the Gita description itself that Sanjaya has become a realized soul. Also, seeing the vision itself doesn't necessarily mean you have, again, it just depends on what you mean by realized soul, but I'm taking it to mean you have become spiritually illumined, spiritually enlightened. And that is not the sense I get from the portion that we saw today. Neither Sanjaya nor Arjuna for that matter. Sure, a vision will remove some parts of my ignorance, some aspects of my understanding will improve, but that does not necessarily mean that I'm enlightened and ready for moksha. Otherwise, there would be no difference between seeing this cosmic vision and entering into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But the two are different. So all of these visions are good stepping stones. They do help in our evolution and understanding, but that does not necessarily mean we have become realized. And so I think it's still a speculation that Sanjaya got realized and Dhritarashtra was not realized. None of us knows. And the truth is that the only person we can be absolutely sure of who is realized or not is our own selves. So each of us can say at this moment whether I am realized or not. But whether someone else, whether it is Sanjaya or Arjuna or whoever, speaking about someone else's realization is still a speculation. We can make an intelligent guess about it. That is why we have these descriptions in the Sthita Prajna Lakshana in the second chapter. How does a Jivan Mukta live? How does a Jivan Mukta move? So we have this description about enlightened beings, and we can try to compare. Well, here is this person enlightened or not? Let me see if it matches with some of the descriptions we find in scriptures. But any which way, whether even if it matches or it doesn't match, whatever conclusion we come to, it still would be a guess, because we can be sure only of our own experience. What someone else is experiencing, we really don't know. So the next question is related to that, which was Sanjaya also able to see the vision which Lord Krishna bestowed upon Arjuna? Did Sanjaya's clairvoyance extend to include the Divya Chakshu that Lord Krishna gave to Arjuna? Now, again, based on what I said earlier, whether Sanjaya was able to see the vision that Lord Krishna bestowed upon Arjuna, only Sanjaya really knows an answer to that question. But my guess is that no. At least from the information that is available to us. Because we only read about Krishna giving the divine eyes to Arjuna and not to anybody else. So at least there is no concrete evidence that it was also given to Sanjaya. And so my guess would be no. The second part of the question about Sanjaya's clairvoyance, there is no real evidence also about Sanjaya's clairvoyance. As I have probably mentioned earlier, the popular version of this episode in the Gita is that Sanjaya somehow had this yogic power by which he was kind of seeing what was happening on the battlefield and narrating it to Dhritarashtra, the blind king. But that's not borne out by the textual evidence that actually Sanjaya was on the battlefield. He fought on the battlefield. And on the 11th day of the battle, I think the battle lasted for 18 days. And on the 11th day of the battle, that was when Bhishma fell down. That was when Arjuna's arrows pierced Bhishma. And Sanjaya then hurried back to Hastinapur, that was the capital where the blind king was. Obviously, the king wasn't participating in the battle. So where the king was waiting to hear. There was no internet, so the king had no idea what was going on. And I imagine, again, this is just a speculation, that maybe some messengers came daily, I don't know, to let the king know what happened that day, how many soldiers died, or give some sense about how the war was progressing. But on the 11th day, Sanjaya was the one who came to, and Sanjaya probably was a little higher position than maybe the other messengers who came. Again, I have no idea who came and gave reports to the king. But on the 11th day, it was Sanjaya who came from the battlefield and sat by. Again, it's possible, I did say that, but I probably should have thought it through. It doesn't look like even any other messengers came earlier, because when Sanjaya goes on the 11th day, the very first question, the very first verse by which the Gita begins, Dhritarashtra begins by saying, "What did my children do?" and what the Pandavas did. So really, he was completely in the dark about what was happening. And then Sanjaya is narrating to him things as they developed in the first 11 days, because that's what Sanjaya has seen, has been a first-hand witness of those things. You will also see that the language is in the past tense. If it was a running commentary being given, a live commentary being given, then Dhritarashtra would have said, "What is happening now?" And then Sanjaya would have replied in a present tense. All of it is in a past tense. What did they say? And everything is in the past. So there is no evidence that Sanjaya had the power of clairvoyance. there is also no evidence that Sanjaya had that ability to see the vision. Now we might still say, well, there are these 2 or 3 verses in which Sanjaya seems to describe what is in the verses. I would interpret that by saying he did hear Arjuna speak, because Arjuna has this long set of verses, and based on Arjuna's description, Sanjaya guessed, well, this is what Arjuna must have seen, which is what elicited that description. Now this is, again, I don't have any proof about this. This is just the way my mind envisions what happens, but it's possible that some others might look at it in a different way. Next, is it a fair understanding to see any particular deity as primarily associated with creation versus sustainability versus destruction? Or do some deities encompass the energy of all these actions? Traditionally, the Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva have been associated with these 3. But that's just only one popular way the associations of these deities have occurred. And one is free to associate any particular deity in any which way they want. There is a beautiful cave near Bombay in India on the western coast. And that has this image carved in stone of the Hindu Trinity, if you like. And oftentimes they have this Brahma on one side, Vishnu, and then Shiva, and with like sometimes called Trimurti. But this carving in that cave is called Elephanta Caves near Bombay. There they have this Trimurti, but they are not Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. All the 3 are Shiva. And the description given is that it's Shiva in the creative aspect, Shiva in the sustaining aspect, and the Shiva in the destructive aspect. So, as you can see, therefore, there is no rigid rule about associating specific deities with specific functions. Because ultimately, the divine is one. And the transcendent aspect of the divine and the immanent aspect of the divine, and the divine that manifests in the form of these deities. So it's possible to see every deity having a creative aspect and all these 3 aspects, or just limiting it to one. So it's really up to our own imagination, creative, spiritual imagination to see it through. There is no rigid rule about it at all. Next, what does it mean when we say God gave Arjuna a divine vision? Why would anyone need to acquire a special vision to see a rupa of the divine self? Well, that's just how things are. One way to understand divine vision is that our present vision is a degeneration of the original capacity to see. And because our vision is now deformed, so to speak, our present vision, we can only see things which are very material, very tangible. And so a divine vision really means improving or refining my present vision. Like one of our Swamis used to say, sometimes if there is some eye problem, then we just put some eye drops, and they often help. And so he used to say that we presently have an eye problem. Not this I, the letter I. And so the ego. And so we need to put eye drops. The ego has to drop. When the ego drops, then the vision becomes clearer, and then the divine is seen. So one way of understanding divine eyes is to see that it's just regaining our lost perception, lost capacity to see the divine. Next. How does one differentiate between our inner voice that is fear-based versus a divine father-mother whispering to us about our path? It's not clear what is meant by how do we differentiate between it. Okay, now I think, yes, it's not easy to do so. Swami Vivekananda once said that a lot of us get messages in our life, divine messages, or what we believe is a divine message. And Swamiji said, if that message concerns only you, then do what you think is best. But if that message also concerns somebody else, then think at least 1,000 times before acting upon it. And the reason for that is, sometimes we hear things like, oh, this is what I need to do. And I can either interpret that signal or that message that comes to me as that my mind telling me that, my conscience saying me that, and some people may say God is telling me that. And there is no objective way to definitively know which of these three is true. And so we have to be really very careful. Like say, my God wants me now to go and destroy this person, and I feel that's what the message I'm getting. I have to be really very careful. Whether it's God telling me that, or it's my own subtle desire to go and destroy someone that is giving me all these inner messages, and I'm trying to give a very spiritual or religious color to it by justifying my own intentions by saying God wants me to do that. So that kind of self-deception does occur in life. So we have to be really careful in immediately classifying every little desire or wish in the heart that gets vocalized somehow in our mind and thinking that it is coming directly from God. Personally, I have found it very helpful to cultivate healthy skepticism. That be skeptical about every experience that seems mystical. And I say that because if it is truly divine, if it is truly coming from the Lord, my skepticism will not be able to destroy it. It's nothing in the world can destroy what comes from God. That will have its power. On the other hand, if it is just a product of my overheated brain, my own thinking, my own unacknowledged desires and wishes, then it's helpful to be skeptical about it, because then it's easy to nip it in the bud. So a healthy skepticism is very important in spiritual life. Next, do you always need to have divine eye to see God? Is this eye temporary? How does one develop this eye or get it by God's grace alone? I would think it just comes through God's grace alone. What we can do is to try to live according to dharma, try to be an ideal spiritual seeker as best we can, and pray for God's grace. And when we become fit to receive God's grace in the form of visions or anything of that transcendent nature, then the ability to have those experiences will come through God's grace. So a divine eye etc. Just another way of saying the ability to understand the subtler truths of life. Next, language too is Maya, is it not? Even as it describes time and space given samsara. Did the vision of mother in a terrible form paradoxically negate the fear in Arjuna's heart? I was reminded of something Holy Mother said, that we must let Master drown us if that is his wish. The Gita itself doesn't show that the vision that Arjuna had removed his fear. He was happy. He was in the beginning, you see, he was so happy that something transcendent, something unimaginable, something unbelievable was revealed to him. But quickly, when he saw that terrible form, there is a kind of a mixture. There is this excitement and joy in beholding this infinite form of the divine, but also mixed with this terror. And so we find later on in the same chapter, Arjuna then praying to Krishna and saying, please withdraw this form. Let me see you in that benign aspect of yours. So, and Krishna does withdraw that form. So the purpose for which that form was shown to Arjuna, that purpose was served. It was no longer necessary to keep on pushing that form on Arjuna and terrifying him. That was the purpose was not to terrify Arjuna. The purpose was that he should understand. And when Krishna felt that Arjuna had received the message, that the purpose was served, he withdrew that form. So there is no evidence in the Gita itself that Arjuna's fear went, because we do see him asking Krishna to withdraw that form. Is it fair to say that the ultimate answer to the question why is mother's play? Yes, it's certainly one possible answer, or answer that would make complete sense to a spiritual seeker who sees the divine as a mother, or who sees the divine play, the leela that is going on. But there could be many other answers as well. But this is certainly a very valid answer. Would God realization be a different experience for each one when that happens? God realization is a very blanket term. So if we experience the divine in any form, it could happen in any number of different ways. Because clearly, forms are infinite. The possibilities are infinite. But if we understand God realization in terms of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, Nirvikalpa means no difference. And so when all distinctions disappear, the disappearance of all distinctions will not be different from person to person. So Nirvikalpa Samadhi would be an identical experience for anyone at any point in history, from any part of the world and from any tradition. That would be the identical. But other than that, all other divine and transcendent experiences, there are lots of possibilities that could be different. With the destroying aspect of the divine, we know that we will die, but still one gets so much destroyed over the death of a beloved one. What can be done to avoid such impact on oneself? It's a natural human response to be affected when a near or dear one passes away. But usually we find that whenever we are affected by this, if that way, what happens after we are affected, that can vary from person to person. Sometimes people can remain in that state of grief for a long time. Some people are able to overcome that grief in a relatively short time. And in some people's case, that grief may change the trajectory of their life. We see in the life of Ramakrishna, for instance, how at the age of 9 or 10, when his father passed away, encountering that death at so young an age, it completely changed. He was this very cheerful, happy-go-lucky kid growing up in the village of Kamarpukur. And how that experience, then he suddenly became more thoughtful, more indrawn, and we see a marked change in his life. So sometimes death of a near or dear one can bring about some of these kind of changes also in our life. So it's not so much about avoiding the impact of that, but reflecting over this experience that we have about having to deal with the loss of someone dear and near to us. So trying to understand it, trying to see how it affects us, trying to allow that grief to help me understand life in a better way, help me understand myself in a better way. So if I can use that experience to become wiser, to become stronger, that would be a good way to deal with these experiences, because we cannot stop it. The people who are close to us one day are going to die, just as we are going to die one day. So it's something we have no control over. But what I do have control over is how I learn from that experience. What do I do with that experience? That is what makes a difference between one person and another, of how we deal with these inevitable experiences we get in life. So that brings us to the end of today's comments. Thank you for these questions and comments. They are very, very important. It's important to as we reflect over these themes from the Gita, to connect it with our own life, our own life's experiences, see what questions come. Some of these insights may help answer many of the dormant questions and doubts we may have had in our life. And that's essentially how spiritual life always grows. The goal is not immediately to get an answer, but hold these answers somewhere in the corner of our heart, patiently, not wanting an immediate one-liner and saying, okay, now I know the answer. It's not about knowing the answer. It's about holding the question in the heart and allowing it to just settle there. And as we continue, not just the study of the Gita once a week, but as you continue carrying out your duties and responsibilities in daily life, learning from every experience, and you will find now and then everything in life, even your time at the workplace, the time you spend with your family, the time you spend with your friends, all of those things, all of those experiences, if I'm reflective, if I'm aware, if I'm mindful, will help slowly and gradually those unanswered questions and doubts in the corner of our hearts. Let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
वेत्तासि वेद्यं च परं च धाम त्वया ततं विश्वमनन्तरूप वायुर्यमोऽग्निर्वरुणः शशाङ्कः प्रजापतिस्त्वं प्रपितामहश्च नमो नमस्तेऽस्तु सहस्रकृत्वः पुनश्च भूयोऽपि नमो नमस्ते नमः पुरस्तादथ पृष्ठतस्ते नमोऽस्तु ते सर्वत एव सर्व अनन्तवीर्यामितविक्रमस्त्वं सर्वं समाप्नोषि ततोऽसि सर्वः सखेति मत्वा प्रसभं यदुक्तम् हे कृष्ण हे यादव हे सखेति अजानता महिमानं तवेदं मया प्रमादात् प्रणयेन वापि यच्चावहासार्थमसत्कृतोऽसि विहारशय्यासनभोजनेषु एकोऽथवाप्यच्युत तत्